Yeah, so, good, you guys can see the screen? Okay. In 1997, The Refused recorded the album The Shape of Punk to Come. It was a monumental achievement that would mix the sounds of punk, post-hardcore, and electronic, forever changing the genre and having significant impact on bands for the next 10 years, from Linkin Park to The Used, even getting some amount of success off their lead-off single, The New Noise. What does that have to do with my talk today? Actually, not that much. I just like the album, and I think more people should know about it. But yeah, I like this kind of idea of hybridization and bringing these things together. Anyways, my name is Ryan Carniato. Now my slides are. Okay, there we go. It's been a while since I've done this. Sorry. There we go. I work in Netlify on the open source team. I'm here to talk to you about the latest in Solid, which is SolidStart, which is our Metaframework. So yes, we've entered the Metaframework race, so to speak, joining Next, Nuxt, Remix, Feltkit, Astro, Fresh, Analog, Wood, QuickCity. I hope I haven't forgotten anyone. And this actually isn't a new development for us. We've been working on this for 3 years. Basically when Vite 2 came out, that week, we started on SolidStart. But the truth is I've struggled with this a little bit personally. I've never really liked Metaframeworks. No offense to anyone, but it's always felt a bit like this to me. I never liked being told what to do or how to do things. In a sense, everyone needs a framework, but I often wonder, does everyone need a general purpose one? Right? No one has a general problem. I even had an issue, back in the day with Create React App. It felt like I was giving up too much control. Ejecting and that whole thing. I don't know how many of you were around for Create React App, yeah? I realize now that it was like 10 years ago. But Vite, as I already said, was hugely impactful in changing my mind here. If Create React App locked you in, Vite starters gave you exactly what you needed and they got out of your way. And they were simpler. And I was thinking, like, if Vite was able to do this for classic client-rendered single-page apps, why couldn't we do the same for server rendering? It was clear that there was more need than ever for something to wire all the pieces together. Server rendering is kind of complicated. But I didn't want to contend with being stuck with single solutions. I wanted to leverage projects already in our ecosystem. It's important when you have a small ecosystem like Solid does. So Solid itself is all about primitives. This is like my favorite talk. I put it in every single presentation. The library itself is built on the same building blocks that the end users do. Everyone just uses signals. It signals forever, pretty much. The rendering is done without a virtual DOM or any other representation. Could we apply the same sort of thinking to a Metaframework? I guess it starts, what is a Metaframework, right? Mechanically, I started kind of thinking that there's 4 pieces, and they kind of layer on top of each other. We have kind of like our router that handles our navigation and our data, and there's like the framework, or we call it our library. I don't want to get into that discussion right now. In terms of like handling the rendering, and then there's like the bundler, and then there is like some kind of platform piece so it can run, on serverless and all the different platforms. These roughly kind of go from most opinionated to least in my opinion. But the big part of dressing SolidStart was kind of deciding where to draw the line. I only really cared about the top 2 when I'm working on Solid, and fortunately we found allies for the bottom 2. First of which is Vinci, which kind of marries a pluggable file system routing convention with server-side asset router and bundler to serve as a foundation that like any Metaframework could build on. It's kind of like a Metaframework agnostic tool. Yeah, that's where we've gone into. It's built on Vite. So like it's basically all the Vite plugin ecosystem. But it kind of has like separate bundles that kind of all communicate with each other. But with it, we instantly got things like islands or server components or server functions, client-only render modes. These things could all be handled at that level. On the other hand, Nitro seemed like a really logical choice for us. Low level enough to not be concerned with the layers that I've talked about so far, and powerful enough to be the server runtime for Nuxt and also Analog Angular framework. It's a project clearly made for this use case, and with it we can deploy it to Netlify, Vercel, Cloudflare, Dino, AWS, you name it. Okay, so what? I could go on about just how right this feels, but if it's a whole other thing to show you. So today we're going to go on a bit of a SolidStart journey. This is one journey. Your journey might be different, and that's the point. For me, as I said, it's going back about 10 years, and we're going to start by actually looking at something very similar to create React app. So yeah, I'm just going to switch over here. Sorry, I keep on. There we go. Okay. So I've actually already started up a basic app here in SolidStart. I went through the liberty of copying the old, it's create solid in this case, but create React app starter template. It might be somewhat familiar to people if you go back in the day, there's a spinning logo. And this is client-side rendered. It's kind of experience you'd expect. If I open the dev tools here, I can prove that it's client rendered if that's something people care about. I think if I refresh this and we look at the document, we'll see that there's nothing in the ID app div. And if I go over to the JS, it's a measly 4.5 kilobytes of JavaScript. That's kind of like the baseline here. No server rendering, just that. And how did we accomplish this? Well, we have an app.txt, and it exports a component. That's basically it. You see a couple other files here. They're not that important. Entry client, some TypeScript fun, is just like the mount or render call, and then entry server is like our index HTML. It's just written in JSX. But kind of ignoring these kind of two files, for the most part, you just come in and you write your app. This is a good starting point for my talk today, because we're going to do the same thing everyone does in Create React App, just delete everything out of app TSX and implement it ourselves. And in our case, what I'm going to do is implement, and for time I'm using a bunch of Git commits to kind of quick get through here. But we're going to implement like a simple blog site just for illustrative purposes, because I kind of want to show the evolution, because we're at Create React App, and then the first thing we might do is go, okay, we need to do client rendering, right? So let's kind of transform our app TSX here. And what I did was something that you guys all might have done at one point, created some dummy data at the top of my file, and then basically I made a header, and then I have an iterator. In our case, I'm using solids 4. We could use a map function here if you're like a React dev. It doesn't really matter because it doesn't really update. We're just showing a list of posts that were in this dummy data, and we're displaying them on the page. And if I'm right, actually I should go into dev mode right now, npm dev. This simple app now, instead of being spinning, will be a simple blog site. Yeah, I'm not a CSS expert, but you can see what's going on here, right? And I'm going to close the dev tool so we don't have to worry too much about all that. And this is a good place to start. But the very first thing you realize here in this simple app design is, okay, we need a router, right? In fact, the reason we were 4.5K there is that there was no router. And in fact, SolidStart doesn't even come with a router. You have to install it yourself. It could be any router. You could pick TanStack router. We have a Solid official router, so that's what I've used here in this example. But essentially, we can just go in here, and when I switch to the next git commit here, yeah, check out, we'll get our router in here, and I actually already pre-installed it to save us some time. And now I've gone through the effort of wiring up this router, because this is what you would have done back in the day with Create React App. You would have kind of defined your router, maybe use React router, and you just add your router component, define a few routes, add some components to it, and import those at the top. And in my case, I just made this pages folder just for convenience, because I felt like putting it there. And what I've done here is essentially taken that same list that we had at the top level, iterate over that. I made a simple form for submission. It doesn't do anything yet. And I have a post. And now, because we have the router, at least, we should be able to navigate back and forth between our pages. Although you're going to notice that I'm loading the same data because it's dummied at the top of the file. So we hit our first thing. Okay, now we need to share that data. And I could go implement context, because that's what we did. We got Redux or whatever, and we did that. That's approach we could take. But I'm going to assume that we want the data not to disappear when we refresh the page. So we are going to get some server persistence here, and I'm going to actually install another handy UnJS library, which is called unstorage. And what unstorage lets me do is now I can take our application and I added this lib folder here. And again, just for time, I'm going to have already implemented it. I made a very simple key value store database, essentially. I just imported the stuff from unstorage, set up where it goes, took my dummy data, and just whenever the server starts, it just fills the data. And then I made a very simple API wrapper like you might do, where it uses this to add a post, get all the posts, or get a specific post. Details here are not too important. You could picture use SQL or whatever, but this is something you would do. But this actually leads to the next problem. How do we get that data from the server to the client? Because we're just client rendering our app. So bear with me, I'm getting somewhere. This is just, you've probably all done this before, so it's not terribly interesting, but you might want an API route. And it's very common in Metaframeworks to go and create a file system-based thing. You go into like slash, what are these called? Posts/posts, and we can do that. So let's just do that, right? Unsurprisingly, SolidStart allows you to just do that. And in our case, we have a routes folder. And this is the first little bit of magic, I guess, here, because everything before we would have been able to do in Create React App. Now that we switched here, I have added our routes folder, and we have this new ability to define some like get routes and get all the posts, update the posts, and they're just calling our same helper functions. But we also have to handle the data loading on the client too. Like there's a lot of pieces here, which is what I'm trying to get at. And this would be even more effective if I was sitting there live coding, but then you guys would be waiting here for like 20 minutes. So, but like if I go into say our page, let's pick the listing page. Now, we're going to make a fetch request and get the JSON from it against our API route. Similar thing, I'm using a primitive from Solid called createAsync, which just turns a promise into a signal, so the UI updates. I'm not getting too much today into how Solid works, unfortunately. I've done that in the past, but we're going to kind of focus on just simple API. We just pull out a signal that can update when the data comes in. Now, this will still work, and now we'll actually get the proper blog for the thing. I actually reversed the order of the blogs so that it makes more sense when we add one. And the data loads in. You see when I refresh, if it's fast enough, you might see a loading indicator. That's because I added suspense at the root, and between suspense and these wrappers around the promises, the data state and race conditions are kind of taken care of for you. So this is kind of like what we've been doing for the last couple years, largely, and this was fine. It just there's a lot of little extra details that go in. Like if you want to make a new post here, for example, I have a fetch request, and then now it's a post, and I'm stringifying my data from the form, and then when I'm done, I'm going to navigate back in. I suppose I could show that this actually works. Let's add a new post, test. New post, and then this, I think I have to write 30 characters. This post is at least 30 characters. You can get pretty far on just using a form. Let's create post. Yeah, okay, there, okay. So we've done this before, but there's some downsides to this kind of approach. Mostly that at the beginning, we actually had pretty good types. We just had our data. Now, if I go in here and I want to see what a post title is, it's like any. Because we lost that information because of the fetch. Now I could cast it and add that. So we're JSON stringifying bodies, casting, doing a fetch wrapper, doing all this stuff. So at a certain point, you're kind of like, wouldn't it be great if I could just go in to posts and just be like, no, I don't want to do this. Forget all of this stuff and just be like, why can't I just call that get posts method that I'm calling in the API directly? Why do I want to do the fetch, make the API route, do all that? And as it turns out, in SolidStart, you can. I'm going to just This is the one fun part of using Git commits, because I actually have to undo stuff, is if we go into, see, git post, what I just wrote, and we go into here and go into our library page where we had our API that I wrote before, I just go to the top of the file and write this use server thing. And now I get to import the functions directly, and they're automatically turned basically into API routes. And the benefit of this is I can just import these things anywhere, and now if I go back in here and I go, oh, what's post.title? Oh, it's a string. What's the timestamp? Oh, it's a number. Because this function knows that it's a promise of post of the type. So we've now just reduced drastically, because that API routes folder, it's gone. I deleted it. All we did was just call a function, get the types directly, and we didn't have to do all that other work. In fact, it's much more shown when we go and try and go to where we make our new posts, because now when we just add our post, again, we just call our function. That we know what the types of inputs are, and we can just, again, import it directly and then do our navigation. Okay, so this would have been fine for quite some time, honestly. It's hard to actually find much fault with this. All the functionality works. We wrote way less code. But unfortunately, our app got bigger. We have a code editor on the next page. So the thing that inevitably happened next is that we needed code split. And that actually introduced a whole world of problems for client-side apps. This happened around 2017, 18. Everyone realized that their apps are getting too big. And what this means now is that we have to go into our, sorry, I lost my mouse for 2 seconds. Yeah, there we are. We have to go back into our app entry point, and we have to look at this router and be like, okay, now we need these routes to lazy load. Now, it's not too difficult for us to import them dynamically and wrap it in lazy. Are you familiar with React Lazy? I've assumed Vue has something very, very similar where you can just say this is a lazy component. And I'll just quickly save myself the typing. Hope you guys are following along. I know I'm going really fast. I just only have so much time. See, lazy imported routes. And then now we can plug them into the router. The problem now, though, is we've introduced a rather nasty problem into our application. Apparently that change broke something, but we'll get there in a second. What we've introduced into our app is this scenario. We've created waterfalls. Essentially, you have the core bundle, then you have the bundle for the page that you lazy loaded, and then you have the data you fetch. And they're going to go 1, 2, 3 on you. And that's not great for your initial page loading. That's just not great in general. So how do we address this? Well, the first gap is very difficult to address without the bundler's help. You need to know essentially which pages have which JavaScript so that you can render preload tags into the top of the header, and then it'll do it. The second part, though, we can kind of manage on ourselves. And a lot of solutions do this. This is why there's things like get server-side props, remix loaders. So why don't we add that to our example? And yeah, here our routes have a lazy loaded component and there's a load function. Now I'm importing the functions here. But this is kind of starting to get messy. I'm in the top of my app and I'm dynamically loading some stuff, not other stuff, trying to wire things. Everything gets imported. So I guess it's fair to say why we have file system routing. This is the whole reason I went through this whole thing, because with file system routing, you get to solve all the waterfalls and you don't have to manage all this importing stuff yourself. So yeah, again, let's check out this branch. And now we have file system routing. And what you're going to see is it looks similar to before, except we're not importing all the routes. And all we did is SolidStart imported this one thing. This is actually, I think, the first import we've seen today from SolidStart itself. It's just a file routes component, which is just JSON. Any router could just process that and handle it how they want. And from there, we can basically use our routes folder like before and follow a file system-based routing solution. I did rename the post route listing, put brackets around it. That means it's an index route. So just, I don't like having files named the same. I know everyone has their own convention. Some people like having like .page in every single folder, and then they search for it and they can see all the 100 pages they have to deal with. You never have to name your file the same. So it's just a minor thing that I like. But in general, we now just do the exact same thing we were doing before, but we need to solve that lazy loading problem. And the way we solve this in SolidStart is there is a special export const route equals this. But what's kind of cool about this is this route export can be for any router you want because it just gets merged into the JSON. So in our case, we're going to say something like satisfies route definition, and this comes from Solid Router, but it could come from TanStack router or whatever. And then now our route metadata, like our load function, can be written inline. We know it takes route args, and we can write our load. We can just hoist this up. Now, you see that these problems all just lead into the next problem. If we had a page where we're calling get posts twice, we're going to call it twice and fetch the data twice. That's not what we want to do. So we have a couple options. We could try and pass it through to our components. But there's a problem there. TypeScript breaks again, right? If you've ever used remixed loaders, you know you have this fun thing that's like return, like what return type of loader kind of thing to infer this. So this is why I like TanStack query generally, because, and these kind of like RPC kind of things, because what if you could just call in two places and it could be the exact same promise? So, okay, now we need a cache API, but maybe it's not that bad. So let's just, I'm gonna undo this one for a sec, get back to our place so I can jump ahead and apply, I believe, my last cache get here. And okay, we still have this load function here, but what I've gone in and I updated our posts, and what I did was I pulled the use server from the top of the file into the specific functions. It's the same functions, but now I've wrapped these in a cache, and I said this is the cache key. Wrap this in a cache, so this is the cache key, and then I defined the add post as what I'm going to call an action, and these come from the router. This is just a router concept with data loading because it's kind of route aware, and it's also has this cache. And now with this cache solution, but you could use like TanStack if you wanted or some other cache solution here, we now have the ability that it won't fetch twice. So, and it has some niceties about doing this because I pulled that redirect we were doing on the new page now into the logic of our action. So now when you have an action, it knows to redirect to the next page. So if you actually look at the code in our components, like the page, it's just create async get post. We have nice types. If I go into the one where we make the new one, well, actually all the code disappeared because, as it turned out, the action can be fed directly to a form. And now all that code parsing stuff we were doing before, you don't have to worry about because it will just take that straight through. I did have to edit the action to take form data. You don't have to use actions this way, and there is that TypeScript concern when you get into forms a bit. But if you look at it, what's kind of cool about this is now this form component doesn't actually need any JavaScript. It's actually just a completely static page. It has all the validation required. Obviously, you're going to have to validate on the server too. Never forget to validate on the server, even if things are so easy you can just type them out. But essentially, we have a full system of caching and validation that has route and cache aware. Of course, you can use other solutions, but I just want to kind of show that. And what that should do, assuming it looks like the HMR is not working perfectly. Let's restart the dev server. I was pretty brutal on it. Let's do this. All right, what? I'm on 3,000. It's like part of me is wondering like, okay, there we go. We're back on our blog site. We basically still have our working example, and if I go in here, we'll kind of go through the process of making a new blog quick here. So I'm going to go, new blog, and I'm actually going to clear this out because I want to show something a little bit cool that we can do here because we know about your caches and we know about your routing. So then we can go like, okay, what is it? This is 30 characters. I'm going to post this form, and Oh, not 30 characters. Almost 30 characters, okay. Thank you. Am I? Now? Okay. Okay. What I wanted to actually notice is a network request here. Because, yes, we posted, but you notice there's only one network request. Well, what happened here? Well, because we know what you're going to do, we know what you cache, because you hoisted it up, we can actually start fetching the data for the next route before all in the same response and stream it back to you. So you can actually post something, have the server realize it's a redirect, have it respond to the client, and start fetching the promises and the data for the next page and stream them all and have Suspense take care of it all in a single request. So we basically, I don't know if you've used TanStack Query or a lot of common revalidate things. It's very common for you to post, success, go back to the server again. So yeah, we just doubled the speed of every interaction. This is what comes from being able to use these pieces together effectively. However, as I mentioned before, the power here is that you didn't actually necessarily need to use this particular library. This is our journey today. I guess the final piece, because that form worked really well, is we should try turning off JavaScript and show progressive enhancement really quickly here. So let's disable JavaScript because everybody needs to be able to work until JavaScript will load. Let's refresh the page. Oh, it's blank. Do you guys know why it's blank? Any guesses? No? Okay. We never turned SSR on. We've been doing, we never left create React app. So maybe we should turn SSR on. So let's go in here. Config SSR. I'm going to use Solid's async mode here because it doesn't stream. We do out of order streaming by default, but for progressive enhancement, you can't have the streaming on because it requires JavaScript to move the stuff into order. And our page is back. And now, just to prove that it works, test one last time. That's good stuff. This is definitely over 30 characters. You'll see that everything still works with no JavaScript. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is we've only touched on the capability here of SolidStart. We didn't talk about cross-file optimistic updates, middleware, islands, or more details around deployment. But what we did accomplish was our goal. The only thing we imported in our demo from SolidStart after we got started was that file routes. Every piece was used was optional. Every piece was replaceable by another piece. Every server functions work as well on their own or with, say, TanStack Query, or with our router APIs. Hell, bring your own router. Like, it doesn't actually matter. And that's what I'm after. I don't like being locked in. That's the thing. And for SolidStart, you can start with as little as you want and go up to infinity. If you liked what you heard today, want to find out more about SolidJS, definitely follow me on Twitter or SolidJS on Twitter. And I also like streaming on YouTube, long 4-hour, 5-hour streams almost every Friday. So catch me there. But thank you very much.